Welcome to this episode of Pen to Paper Press Podcast. I'm Cindy Kochis. There is a backstory weaved into each book. To explore the creative process, I am sitting down with authors, writers, editors, publishers, and an array of creative souls to have a conversation centered on how they developed their stories to completing their works of art. Each episode is an opportunity for us to explore mindsets, pearls of wisdom, and the experiences that began our journey as an author from the moment we put pen to paper. Landis Wade is a recovering trial lawyer, the host of Charlotte Reader's podcast, speaker and author of Deadly Declarations, The Christmas Heist, The Legally Binding Christmas, and The Christmas Redemption. Welcome, Landis. It is good to spend time with you.
Hey, Cindy, it's great to be here. I really appreciate you having me on the Pen to Paper Press Podcast.
You are very welcome. And, you know, it's obvious you are a very, very busy man because, you know, if I was to have listed off everything, I'd be talking for another 5 minutes, and you know that's too long for an introduction. So, oh, go ahead.
No, so that's exactly right. Some of my former law partners wonder, did you really retire? And I'm like, no, I'm in that recovering phase, as you said. I'm the recovering trial lawyer, and I just can't break old habits. I'm putting in the hours. It's just a lot more fun than having to fill out a timesheet. You know.
There you go. Because, you know, there is a part of me that really wants to unpack that. What is a recovering trial lawyer? But, you know, truly where I'm curious and would love to direct the conversation initially is your experience with producing the literary podcast. You know, what inspired you to create and produce this podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was practicing law in my late 50s, trying to figure out what I was going to do in my 60s. Was I going to continue to come into the office and handle these cases, and didn't want to be one of those lawyers that died at my desk. And so I was thinking, I want to do something creative in my 60s. What can I do? I've written a couple of books. I kind of want to continue that, but I'm not. I need to get better at it. I want to study more. I want to learn more. And I thought, how can I interact with authors more? And I said, I kind of looked around. This podcast thing was out there, and I noticed that there were podcasts around the country doing this deal where they interview authors. And I thought, well, hell, I know how to interview people. I've been a lawyer all my life. I've been to court. I've done depositions. I can probably do that, even though I knew nothing about podcasting. I'm like, well, let's try this thing. And I thought, we'll start small. The Charlotte community, at least the metropolitan area, a couple of million folks in and around Charlotte, a lot of writers in North Carolina. There aren't, newspapers have gone away from really reviewing books very often. And the same is true with radio. It's hard to get, on a radio spot sometimes. And even when you do, it's not a very deep dive in those situations, right? It's just tell me about your book or a couple of questions. And I thought maybe there's sort of a niche out there, and there weren't that many people doing it. Nobody in Charlotte that I knew of, and not many in North Carolina. And I thought, okay, well, why not give it a shot? Because it'll be something fun to learn, challenging my technological brain, which wasn't very technological when I started. Yeah, I used to have to raise my hand to IT to have them come help me change my password, on my computer at work. So I was starting at a very low level. So anybody who's listening who doesn't think that they can do this thing would just use me as that example, because, there's a lot on YouTube. There's a lot of people. The podcast community, like the writing community, is very supportive, and they'll answer your questions and that kind of thing. So I thought, why not? I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Nobody will listen. It won't work, but I'll meet some authors. And it kind of started small. I started with a couple of folks in my writing group, and then, kind of branched out from there. And I found a couple of authors in the Charlotte community, and then it started getting more regional. And then, in 3.5 years now, I've interviewed more than 300 authors in more than 28 states and 3 countries. And it just kind of started, snowballing there. And you asked the question sort of why. The why had to do with this curiosity about how authors do what they do. In part, what you do in this podcast, you try to pick people's brain, find out, why they got into what they got into. And for me, it was, I was coming off of being a trial lawyer. I needed something to keep me busy. I started in a co-working space that had a podcast studio, started meeting people, hanging out with creatives, which was kind of fun, and interesting.
Yes.
And so it just kind of, it was a project, and it's continued to be a project, although it had to switch during the pandemic because of the need to not be in a studio anymore and try to do this thing over the internet. But that taught me new skills as well, as it's taught authors new skills about how to communicate about their books and what they're doing, online. So it's been an interesting journey. I've learned a lot along the way. I'm always trying to figure out how to, make it better. And now it's kind of figuring out, well, how do I do this and also manage my writing? So, that's the fun part too.
Yes. And, we learn through conversation more so than you're you're a lawyer, so part of your job is to read, and that's where
Right.
you learn a lot of stuff. But it's through conversation that we learn more, because we can pick up on the energies, we can the tones. When it's written, you don't always hear the tone, but through conversation you hear the sarcasm more so. As I giggle a lot on that one. But and I completely lost where I was going with that, but that's part of why I do the interviews. Is it's so easy for writers or anybody in any field to get caught in our head, because as writers, what do we need? We need time alone to sit with our whatever we're writing on and be able to focus. And it's really hard to do that when you've got all these millions of distractions. By sharing the conversation, we're learning that, oh, I'm not the only one that's experiencing this. Or the other aspect is, how in the world did you get through writer's block, or whatever. And
Exactly. Because we did an episode one time on rejection, because I was seeing a lot of, that come up a lot when people are, submitting their manuscripts or they're getting feedback on their novels. And there's always going to be some haters out there and some people that aren't going to take a book that's good for different reasons. And it sort of it taught me a couple of things. It taught me that, your book is not for everybody. And we have to remember that. Just because it's well written and well edited, it might be a genre that somebody just doesn't care for, and that's fine. That's okay. But this idea of community really comes into play when we talk about podcasting and writing and whatever. It's important because rejection is a thing, and as we talked about it on the podcast, people have different reactions to it. Some people can't get over it. There's the inner critic. I mean, even now when I'm launching my new book, even though I'm doing a lot of good things, getting a lot of good feedback, it's like, yeah, but there's that little thing over there, and you can't let it bother you. You can't get distracted by that, because not everything is going to work out. But I love this one comment somebody made to me on the rejection episode. One person had a goal to get 100 rejections on their manuscript, but they fell short when somebody accepted it at 85 after the 84. And so she didn't meet her goal, but she found a publisher, and then,
that's great.
And then there was the one where the very accomplished writer who'd been published in all kind of journals, her piece just wasn't getting accepted. And every time it came back, she said, "It is so nice to have you back home, because now I can send you out to somebody that really cares about you."
Oh, I like that twist. That's a great twist on that mindset, because on the Pen to Paper Press podcast, it seems that one of the conversations that really gets talked about a lot is the inner critic. And, I had one guest, Elizabeth Kipp, who we were talking about the inner critic, and she's like, I transformed my inner critic to have the voice of Joan Rivers. And I'm like, oh yeah, I could see that, you know.
That's a good idea to have an avatar out there for your inner critic, so you can laugh when they poke fun at you. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Well, and you know, who else can you think of that's got it's going to tell you the truth, tell you how it
Yeah.
is, pull no punches, and get straight to the point without any fluff and no stroking the ego. You know,
Yeah.
it's like this is how it is.
Exactly. That's why you need, a good editor that's not your mom or your dad or your brother or your sister or your
Oh
best
yeah.
friend. Somebody who's got a professional touch who can tell you like it is. Because if they don't tell you like it is, it's not really worth having that feedback, because that's where you need to carve the stone and make it better.
It is. And I do editing. And so it's interesting to have to push. You need to explore this. You need to broaden this. Don't just tell me. You got to make me feel it. I want to feel it. I want to be sitting in the room with you while you're going through this, while you're thinking that yoho, the boyfriend or the husband,
Mm-hmm.
whoever,
Mm-hmm.
is an utter jerk. The way you've got this written, I'm like, yeah, okay, he's a jerk.
Right.
Show me he's a jerk. Why? What did he do? What are you feeling?
Right. Right. Right.
And expanding on that. And somebody else could, like you said, the mother, the father, the sister, the best friend. Oh yeah, this is great. And they don't have the courage to tell you the truth because they don't want to hurt your feelings. Plain and simple. They don't want to hurt your feelings.
That is very true. And, you can't really have too many feelings as a writer when you're writing, other than the feeling that you need to write more and get it on the page, because until you get it on the page, there's nothing really to work with. And my editor, who really pushes me, she tells me she's not supposed to make me feel comfortable. And I said, well, you're doing a great job with that.
Good for her.
Because her mantra is add, subtract, reorder, and clarify. So she's always pushing me to, cut the stuff that needs to go, to add in place of it the things that might need to be there, like you just mentioned. Let's flesh this out. Maybe we can get some more sensory perception here. I don't taste anything. I don't feel anything. Those kind of issues. What else is in the room? What's going on around these people as they're talking?
Mm-hmm.
Don't just continue the conversation. Let's see something else that's happening in the room. Make it a little more cinematic, and then move things around a little bit. You need to start in the middle. You need to start where the action is. Let's get maybe at the beginning of scenes there's a little backstory in a couple of paragraphs. Cut those out. Let's start in that chapter, where there's a little bit of action, a little bit of excitement, a little bit of something, that pulls the reader in. And then by all means, and I know this as a lawyer over the years, clarify, because you can't, I've bought into this idea that if the reader doesn't understand something that you've written, it's not the reader's fault, it's the writer's fault. And I don't know who said that, but I think it's a good lesson, because sometimes the writers that say, well, it's perfectly clear, but if somebody doesn't get it, it's not their fault, it's your fault.
Right. And so for you, because you have lawyers have to write things certain ways, and you're a trial lawyer, so you're standing up in front of a judge and you got to say things in certain format and direct and so forth, and try not to lead on the witness. Oh, had to throw that in there. Anyways, so you're when you're writing out your script and your points that you need to make out, make apparent to everyone in the courtroom, you have to write it in such a way. So now flipping that over, as a creative writer, now you have the freedom to expand however and wherever you want. Did you find that to be like too many, like that option overload, or was it like, woohoo, let's go?
Yeah, well, when you're writing the first draft, just woohoo, let's go. It's get it down on paper, and that is freeing. But I will say that while lawyers can be, well organized, um, we can also go on too long sometimes, whether we're arguing to the court or whether we're writing a so-called brief. And
Mm-hmm.
if a lawyer is writing a brief and they're given a page limit of 20 pages, they're going to write 20 pages. If it's 30 pages, they're going to write 30 pages. So that's why the courts put limits on, the briefs, because they go on and on and on. And so that's one thing you have to learn, I think, switching from the law to writing fiction, is that, while you got sort of a good background, you need to be thinking about a little bit more about brevity. And when I say brevity, I know, look, novels are longer than briefs, sure,
Right.
but each little compartment of that novel is not. It is it needs to be a tight kind of part of the whole. And the lawyers that get to the point in the various sections that they're presenting, I think, have a better job of winning over their audience. And so lawyers also tend to talk in passive voice a lot. May it please the court, I represent so-and-so of the so-and-so, instead of just,
Mm-hmm.
Coming out and saying in an active voice. So lawyers fall into that trap. And as you know, given the fact that you do editing and you've done this podcast, active voice is very important when writing fiction, because you want to move the story forward. You don't want to start from behind. So that was a little bit of a learning curve to me. Plus, dialogue is new as a fiction writer compared to a lawyer, because in the law you're just quoting from the deposition, or you're having somebody repeat something on the witness stand. But I tell you, it's helped me with writing the courtroom scenes to have been in the courtroom, to have interviewed witnesses, because I can sort of remember the feel of it, how they talk, how they sometimes interrupt, how their sentence structure is not complete sentences, but sometimes may be half sentences. And so that helps me in writing the dialogue in my lighthearted legal thrillers.
I didn't even think about that dialogue is obviously, it's excluded from your briefs as such. I mean, you're not, she said, he said, they did.
Right.
You're not writing how well that cinnamon sweet roll really smells and how it reminds you of grandma's kitchen. You're not adding that in there. So then writing dialogue, was that something that was like you had to stop and think about, okay, how do people actually talk, and then put that into book format, because it's a little different. We try to write how people talk, but when you get writing too many that's, because naturally we say that a lot, or we have the long ands and the so's. I am horrible. When I'm editing, I'm taking out that last little phrase I just said, and the ums and the long drawn out ands and the so, because I do that so often. Well, we don't speak that way. I mean, we speak that way, but when we're writing a book and writing that dialogue, we're not adding that in there, because what are you going to do? You're going to annoy your reader. And so shifting from non-dialogue to dialogue must have been an interesting journey.
Yeah, no, it is. Everything's a learning journey. And, a lot of times when the dialogue's being quoted in court is coming from a previous statement. And as you said, sometimes those statements, sometimes they're well crafted. They come in the form of an affidavit that, the lawyer wrote, not the client or the witness. But when you get the raw testimony, that comes out in court, or when somebody's cross-examining somebody, that feels more real. And that's the kind of language I want to transfer to the page in my books. And I think one way to, and I've gotten this tip from several writers who've been on the show, New York Times bestselling authors, they read their manuscripts out loud to see if they sound right to the ear. And if they don't sound right to the ear, they go back and work on the dialogue.
Right. So let's talk about your books.
Oh, thanks.
You have one that's just coming out, and how, when it comes to writing your books, are they something that just kind of pour out of you, or is it a process of, that took me 3 years, that one took me 2 years, that one took me 20 years? Are you one of those really, just sit down, pour it out, or are you a dabbler with it?
It's evolved from the first book to this fourth book, in part because I took on this thing called podcasting, and as you know, there's some time commitment that's involved in that. So it was I joke with people, when I was practicing law, I was able to get out a book a year, but when I started podcasting, it took me 3 years to get this book out, and and they don't understand why, because I don't have but I only had two things to focus on then, which was my day job and then writing at night, whereas now I'm dealing with a lot of different people. I'm going to conferences. I'm participating in short form writing and long form writing, and I'm writing a book. And so I think that my process, and probably for most authors, it evolves over time a little bit. I was listening recently to an author, best-selling author, talk about how she didn't outline her first novel that was, did really well because she didn't have a time limit. She could take years to write it, but she decided with her next books, when she was under contract to get it done in a year, she needed to think about outlining a little bit. So she got into the outlining process. I didn't outline my first three books. I just wrote them for fun and let them flow. And this fourth book, as I was writing it initially, I didn't have the through line for the story because I had it set. It was a mystery. It was set in a retirement community. I wanted that. I wanted the humor of the retirement community, the amateur sleuths. There's going to be there's a lawyer in there who doesn't want to be there, who's gotten kicked out of his big law firm, and he thinks his life is over, having to be in a retirement community, lost his wife, and he don't want to be there. So you got the reluctant hero, and then you got these other retirees, and the whole thing is there really life after a career? And does anything happen in a retirement community other than trying to figure out when your next meal is coming and that kind of thing? So, I wanted to explore that theme, but I didn't have the through line for the story until and this is where the podcast comes in. I interviewed an author who'd written a nonfiction book about a historical event in history in my hometown here, Charlotte, North Carolina, that I really hadn't thought much about or known much about. And it set me on this journey of, first I asked him, I said, "Hey, are you going to write the novel? Because this is perfect for a novel." He goes, "No, you write it." I said, "Okay, I'm going to write it. As long as you give me some feedback on it, make sure I don't mess up the history too much," which he was good about. But it took me 3 years because I was kind of searching for what was going to get me passionate. Once I found what was going to get me passionate, this historical mystery, then I was able to write in spurts more so. And I didn't have the excuse that I was trying to use that, I don't have enough time because of the podcast and that kind of thing. So I kind of took 3 weeks off from podcasting and went off and wrote about 60,000 words to the 20,000 I'd been messing around with for a year or so, and then came home and wrote another 30,000 words. And then I had this thing I could look at and say, okay, now I got something to work with.
Mm-hmm. So for you, is the writing that first draft like the easiest part, or is it more when you're digging into the editing and pulling things apart and reorganizing? I mean, is that a fun process for you?
Have any of your writers ever said writing is easy?
Yeah. Some have said that the easiest part is that first draft because there's that flow.
Right.
What they really dislike is the promoting of self and promoting their book, because they and it's easy to do. I mean, I do it as well. As that book is a part of me. It's like an appendage. It's like my third arm or something, and which is not true. Our books our products are supposed to stand on their own, but yet we grab them. So it's the promoting and the marketing that a lot of kickback comes from. The editing, it's like some like it, some really didn't like it because it was, and probably a lot of that comes, wow, the wind really just picked up. Anyways, a lot of that comes through with that whole inner critic that reminds them, yeah, you suck as a writer. Look at that sloppy stuff you put. Why did you write that? And so the editing tends to be a trigger point.
Yeah, well, I don't find writing to be easy, but I find it to be a challenge, right? I find it to be an exciting challenge. during the first draft, since I write mysteries, I'm thinking not only about the characters, but I'm thinking a lot about the plot, because I don't want to go down such a tangent or rabbit hole that when I get there, I go, well, this ain't going to work. That ain't going to work in the plot. So I have to think a little bit through that process, to get it down when I'm writing the mystery, even if I don't outline it. And so I find writing to be a challenge. I don't find it, and I've heard authors say, and I tend to agree that, all good writing is rewriting, because it's where you polish what you've been working on, and the more you rewrite it, the better it's going to get. I do understand what you're saying about authors who are reluctant to, so-called promote themselves, and we talk a lot about that on our podcast too. But as you said, and I agree, look, this is a part of you. You've worked hard on it. If it's worth spending the time that you spent on it, then, get up behind your desk and go out there and tell people about it. Be proud of it. And don't worry so much about how many books people buy. The ones that do buy it, the ones that do read it, be grateful for them. And, don't shy away from from trying new things that could be challenging. Whether it be social media, whether it be some kind of promotion with one of the book promoters, whether it be something creative. I've had fun as a podcaster. I've done something that I'm going to release in May, where for my audiobook, the narrator, I thought did a great job with the characters. And so I had this idea of writing a script for a 30-minute interview of 3 of my characters, where I called them on the telephone. And so I called 3 of my characters, and he played the role of the characters. And he had a fun time. We had fun doing that. It was something a little bit different. It'll help promote the book. But, when I called the antagonist in the book, he started getting all over me about the things that I had accused him of in the book. And he started asking me questions about why he thought, don't you understand that just because, law is, we have to make money in the practice of law. The particular evildoer I'm talking about, he's the managing partner of this big law firm that's caused a lot of problems for the protagonist. He says, it's not evil to run a law firm like a business. Why do you think that, Mr. Wade, who can't obviously continue to practice law because you can't really do it anyway? So he's giving me a hard time as the character. So I thought that was a little fun thing, a little separate thing to do that was part. And, you can do it in different ways. You can do a scripted interview, put it up on your blog if you're not an audio person, or you can do a video YouTube or something. But that, do things that are creative, do things that are different, and also find some theme of your book. My book relates to the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, which you may talk about. So my launch event is going to be at a brewery that happens to be named Old Mecklenburg Brewery, which has a beer called Captain Jack beer. And Captain Jack's actually in my novel. So I thought, what better place to have a launch than where they sell the Captain Jack beer, which has the fresh taste of freedom in every delicious swig. So do things that are fun. Do things that are fun. Do things that are interesting to you. Don't just get and don't try to compare yourself to other authors, because everybody is at a different part in their journey. I asked Steve Berry on the podcast. He's a New York Times best-selling author. He's got thrillers that have been released in I don't know how many countries, 30 million copies. And I said, so you were an overnight success? And he said, yeah, but it took 10 years, So people, it takes time to become an overnight success. And if that's your goal, if your goal is to be very successful and sell lots of books, it could take 10, 15, 20 years. So don't be in a hurry. Don't compare yourself to other people. If you're doing this thing called writing and you've actually gotten through this process of writing a novel, that's a huge accomplishment in and of itself. And so be proud of that, and be proud to share that with other people.
Very much agreed. I like that, because when we're writing, we're not writing it necessarily for self. And in many cases, when we are writing it, we're working through our own stuff. Our parts of our past or parts of somebody else's past that we're close with shows up in the pages. Obviously, the names and the situations have been changed to protect the innocent or guilty. But so we're working through things, or we're adding that, justification or whatever. But we do that to share it with somebody else. It's not really a rag sheet where we're just spilling out it's not a journal, where we write down, whatever's bugging us or the grocery list. So,
right. Yeah. Authors want to be read. I mean,
yes.
you write to be read, and it's part of what you do. And of course, there's a certain gratification that comes with putting words on a page that actually fit together nicely. And at the end, you think, no, that wasn't bad. That was pretty good,
So pat yourself on the back.
Exactly. Why not? And then, but you're right. It's you want to be read, and getting the books out there is a way to do it, and talking about them. And, frankly, I'm not sure. I mean, authors, we do operate in a cocoon when it comes to writing sometimes, but then there are writing groups that are supportive of each other. There are writing organizations in every community, whether it be writer clubs. We have a number of those in North Carolina that I'm a member of, and it's a great way to network and to talk with other writers. And I think, to be able to write a novel, I sort of feel like you got to connect with the community. You've got to study, the craft, and you've got to be committed to the end product, because only you are going to be the ones to get it there, Right. But you can have a supportive community along the way. I don't think any novel ever gets written without the support of someone other than the person writing the book. I'd cross-examine them pretty hardly if they said otherwise.
Okay, so I'll change. No, I'm.
Yeah. Because you talked about editing. I mean, when you're helping other writers with edit their work, you're supporting them. You're making their work better, even if you're being compensated for it. It doesn't get done without other people putting their eyes on it, giving you feedback, or just encouraging you, when that inner critic is giving you a difficult time. Keep putting that one foot in front of the other, or that one finger on the keyboard.
Yes. Yeah. Let those fingers do the tap dance across the keyboard. So then for you, obviously you're coming up with creative ways for promoting your books. What is something that you did with your first book that really worked, and you're like, you know what, I'm doing that for the other books that I publish, as far as like promotion, or are they each very unique and they just kind of have their own life?
No, so my first 3 books were kind of they were fun. They are, because I was still in the throes of practicing law, so I was looking for this sort of creative release. So I wrote these. I did this what if, and it was like, what if a lawyer was faced with having to represent someone who believed in Santa Claus, and what if that person was actually right? And so the 3 books I wrote, which is part of the Christmas Courtroom trilogy, is a story of a young solo practitioner lawyer who's faced with that dilemma. And if he doesn't win the cases that he's assigned to in each of those books with these characters who believe in Santa Claus, Christmas won't come, and hundreds of thousands of children will be disappointed. So we put Christmas on trial in the courtroom, have a fun time doing it. It's kind of one reviewer called it a cross between My Cousin Vinny and Miracle on 34th Street. So you get the vibe, the vibe of that a little bit. So
I love it. That's great.
So I wanted to bring the humor and the levity of the courtroom, but it also has sort of an underlying theme of, not being able to, you have to believe in the things you can't, touch, feel, see. And so you had to suspend belief and kind of go with it and try to prove this, that, and the other. And so with those books, I had fun because I went to Christmas bazaars and I took the story to different places where people enjoyed the Christmas season. And I had this marketing idea that, look, Christmas is going to come every year. So my book might not be on the shelf year round, but they're going to bring it out in November, December, or maybe I'll sell some then. So that was the fun part of the first, just getting it out there and going to these different events where people went, wow, that's kind of interesting. I'll read that. The other thing I did was, when I started thinking more about promotion, we did some ebook promotions related to the books, to where I put the first book in the series free. The Christmas Heist, which is the first book, is actually free online. You can go get it. And the idea being that, if you like it, you might buy the next one and the one after that. And so, as a result of that, it's garnered, more than 400 or 500 reviews on Amazon. So that kind of worked to get people reading the book and commenting on the book. And it was a good way to kind of get the book out there. And so, after I saved Christmas 3 times, I thought, I need to do something different. And so that's when I came up with this idea of blending a modern day mystery with a historical mystery. And what's my new book, which is Deadly Declarations. And as I said earlier, the full idea didn't come to me until I interviewed a guest on my podcast. But I found this mystery. A few people may know the story, but as the story goes, in May of 1775, 1 year before the Declaration of Independence, a small group of men in Charlotte, North Carolina, this place George Washington called a trifling place, didn't have but about 700, 800 people living in the back country at that time. They got word that day in May of what had happened. It took about a month for the news to get down here to the back country, North Carolina, from Massachusetts, of the British firing on the colonists at Lexington and Concord, and of course the shot heard around the world. And they were incensed. They were backcountry Presbyterians. They didn't like the British anyway. There were a lot of Scots-Irish that had moved to this area. So they declared independence from the greatest nation in the world and read that Declaration of Independence from the courthouse steps, and got a tavern owner named Captain Jack to ride that 500 miles to Philadelphia to deliver it. And at that point, the story goes cold, because the delegates he delivered it to, although there is historical evidence that he made this trip, that he was carrying this thing of independence with him, but then the delegates didn't write about it. They didn't talk about it. And yet it became this controversy in history, because when some information came out in the early 1800s about it, John Adams saw it and thought, as he described it, the greatest curiosity and deepest mystery that ever occurred to me. And Thomas Jefferson called it spurious and an apocryphal gospel. And then once John Adams accused Thomas Jefferson of plagiarizing from the Mech Deck, well, then things got serious. And so that's a thing in history that few people know about, even in Charlotte. And I thought that would be fun to put in a novel. And I wonder if through fiction I could solve this mystery once and for all. So that's what I did.
That's interesting. You're right. I was not aware of that. You're going to, with this book, you're going to bring a lot of, right. Is that true? What happened to that? You're going to bring forth a lot of those inquisitive questions of, did I really know this? Or
yeah, exactly. It's like I say when I read historical fiction, I always want to go and now it's Google. It used to be the encyclopedia. Look it up to find out what's true and what's not in the story. And I hope people are doing that. And some of the advanced readers are telling me, about halfway through, Landis, I'm Googling this to find out how much is real, how much is not. And that was kind of my goal. And I was really gratified that Book Life Reviews, when they did it, so they couldn't tell where history ended, in fact, began, which was kind of my goal, to kind of blend the truth about the story as far as I could before I jumped off, with my imagination. And I do have an afterword in the book that explains, what facts in the book are true and which ones are imaginative, which I find people also appreciated as part of that. But it was fun. And I thought, given my background as a trial lawyer, why not weave into this plot line a trial scene where we put the Mech Deck on trial, and because what better place than to get to the truth, right, than to put it in front of a jury. So, you know, we kind of put the MEC deck on trial in the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, and yeah, it was fun to do. And Craig Travail, a lawyer, was reluctant to do it because he thought his career was over as a trial lawyer. And these two other retirement community residents who he meets, or one is, he's kind of a 75-year-old conspiracy theorist, but just optimistic to a fault, shoots trout in a pond with his rifle. So he's kind of out there. And then Harriet Keaton is the female protagonist. She kind of keeps the men in line, and she kind of keeps them moving forward, former businesswoman. But those three, two men, one woman, try to not only solve the mystery of the MEC deck, but try to solve the mystery of the man whose body was found and whose manuscript on the MEC deck was missing when they found his body.
Interesting. Oh, yeah. That's a really great lead in, because now everybody's going to be like, well, who did it? What was missing? Right. I want to know more.
Yeah. And why do people want to keep the secret of the MEC deck, and who's keeping that secret and why,
Exactly. So, and, for somebody who's not picking up on this is a great example of promoting your book and getting people curious to want to purchase the book. So thank you for sharing that. And of course, that was one of those aha moments. So
no, thank you for letting me do that. This was really an honor to be here to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, no, it's I'm truly enjoying this conversation, and I find it interesting to talk to other individuals who do podcasts. I don't consider myself to be quote unquote a pro at it or anything like that. I have a microphone, but the problem is right now I'm staying with someone, but I have a 22-foot camper that I live in. And when I used, the microphone, all the noise outside my camper, including the lawnmower, the dog next door barking, the kids playing out there, was all picked up. And so I used the headphone set from my computer, and it works great. And there are times that, I feel that I'm not asking the right questions, or I'm stammering too much. And so what's really interesting is listening to another podcaster talk and realize that, oh, hey, I'm doing this. They're doing the same thing I am. We're all winging it. And it's really interesting because we share what it's like to be on, this side of the microphone. And so with you having interviewed a lot of the writers and authors and best-selling and non-best-selling, because I'm assuming you're talking to writers at any level that have been published and so forth, because just because they haven't made the best-selling list doesn't mean that they don't have a good book. For whatever reason, it just didn't happen for them, whether they didn't pursue it or what. I'm wondering. So what are some of the things that those authors and those writers have shared with you that really kind of, oh, I need to take note of that?
That's a great question. And you're right. I think when you're running a podcast, literary podcast, and you're interviewing authors, we as the podcast host have to remember that this is direct examination, to use a legal term, and not cross-examination. And the difference is that in direct examination, the lawyer is supposed to get out of the way and let the witness talk, and in cross-examination, the lawyer's trying to keep the witness from talking, except to answer their specific question with a yes or no answer. And as well as I do, when you get someone on who says, yes to your answer and no to your answer, you're in for a long, or maybe probably a short
Short.
interview. Yeah. But to answer your question, I ask questions on the podcast about the books, of course, and about their what ifs and their inspiration for them. And I try to pick out some scenes and that kind of thing. But we also talk about their writing life and how they got started sometimes. And I'll ask them a question like, if you could tell your younger writing self, that writer who was just getting started, something of value, had you known it, would have made a difference in that younger writer's path as a writer. And they kind of all pause and think back. And even, you're right, I interview authors that are first-time novelists, with indie authors, small press authors, all the way up to New York Times bestsellers. And I like to do that because people are on different journeys. They bring different things, but the stories are always very interesting. But all across the board there, when they're answering that question, you get answers like, just tell yourself it's going to be okay. Don't be in too much of a hurry. Write for writing's sake. It'll work out. Don't feel like it has to be perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. So you get those kind of answers, which I find, recognize that rejection is part of the game. When you hear that from New York Times bestselling authors, that they're talking about rejection too, it kind of makes the rest of us feel okay with what we're doing. But then I narrow in sometimes on writing craft. And I had John Hart on for my 200th episode as honorary guest. And we talked about plot versus character. And he was insistent that it's character that matters most. And I found that when I'm reading novels as well. I like a plot. I like a good plot, but I want to care about what happens to the character. And if you don't care about the character, as he says, why should you care about the plot? And so as he talks about it, it could, you can get away with an average plot with really strong character development. But with that good character development, the best plot in the world isn't going to carry your book. So I thought that was interesting. I also found, I already mentioned Steve Berry's comment about being an overnight success, but I've heard other things from authors about, depending on the genre they're writing, whether it's mystery or whether it's, thrillers or literary fiction, don't try to write to the market. You'll never catch up with the market. So when you think something's hot, don't try to write to that. Come up with a good idea. And when I synthesize all this kind of information I get from people, of course, there's structure. There's, don't start in the middle, all these kind of things they talk about. But when I synthesize it all, for me, it's about finding something that you can get passionate about and get excited about. Because without that passion and excitement, it's going to be hard to motivate yourself to keep writing.
Yes. Yeah, the passion's got to be there, and the flow will happen.
Yeah.
When we mentally get out of our own way, and just when we give ourselves the freedom, and oftentimes we get so bogged down with the whole I got to do it. So what does that do? That brings in that tension even more and more, and nothing moves when everything's bound up. I mean, hello.
yeah, and find what works for you, because when I've talked to authors about their structure and their habits, they're all different. So if you read a book or something, or you read something online that says this is how you must do it, you must get up every morning at 4 a.m. and write 500 words, ignore that advice unless you like that advice, and then adopt that advice. But there's no one way to get to the end in terms of writing a novel. You need to find the best way that works for you. Somebody says, well, I'm an outliner. Somebody says, well, I'm a pantser. I think I'm more of a pants liner. I mean, I think I do a little bit of both as I go along, and I don't always write at the same time. And I sometimes write in spurts. And some people would say, well, you can't do that. You need to get up every morning, do this. Other people say, some people say, well, I get rid of the business in the morning and I do the creative work in the afternoon after I've cleared all that off my plate. Other people say I like to get up in when the liminal is still there. I'm still kind of in that dream state, and write. I feel I'm most creative there, and I do my business in the afternoon, which is fine. Whatever works for a particular author. And I'm sure you've seen the same thing in talking to authors. Everybody has a different approach. And so, adopt the approach that works best for you. And as I say, be willing to try new things. It's all part of my mantra for my third act here, which is, try something new. And if it doesn't work, so what? Try something else.
Well, and that is something that I try to get across is there is no right way. There is no wrong way. Even if you're not writing, that's not the wrong way, because it is what it is in the moment, and it's where you're at in the moment. And give yourself that peace that it's okay. The passion will come back. Life happens. Life gets in the way. And truly follow your heart on it. Because if you don't follow your heart on it, on whatever project you're working on, whether it's writing or painting or even just simply going to work, if your heart's not in it, it shows up on the page, it shows up in the project. And so following your heart, you're in resonance with it, you're in alignment with it, and you're, naturally you're wanting to bring forth the best and share that. And if you're not in that headspace or in that heart space, I should word it that way, actually, because there is a big difference between thinking and feeling. That if you're not in that heart space and you're pushing, you've got a resistance block. Well, why do you have that resistance block? What's holding you back? Is it a self-belief? Is it something, your mom told you when you were 5 years old? Is it something that little Joey said on the playground when you're 8 years old that, you suck, whatever that is? Being willing to look at what the block is to get through it, and talk it out with somebody if you need to. And if you're a private person and talking it out is like, you'd rather have nails go down a chalkboard, then don't talk to somebody, but write it out, get it out of your head somehow. And if you don't want anybody to see it, when I was 16 years old, I was in a really bad space, and a friend of my mother's was like, after trying to get me to talk for a very long time, and he was actually late for surgery because of me, and I didn't know that till later. He eventually slid a pad of paper at me, tossed a pen, and said, "Write it out. You don't want anybody to see it? Burn it. Do it safely, but go out in the driveway and burn it." And he threw a pack of matches at me. So, getting it out, whatever is the resistance, is important as letting that creativity flow and getting the words out that way too. So
almost feels like we're in a yoga practice. Just breathe,
Yes, just breathe.
Just yoga for writers, do some oming and breathing, and then just get it out of your system, and then just go back to the page, right?
Right. And I have absolutely no idea why I shared that, but it just in the moment it had to come out, I guess.
It's good advice, because you should get up and do other things. I have to remind myself to get up after so many minutes in front of the computer. I'm not always successful, but go walk, go exercise, go do something. It'll help your brain function. It'll help you get back into the flow of things. And I heard an interesting technique by some writers. I don't follow it. I probably should, but they say they stop writing when they get to a part that's really engaging, and for me, I'm starting to flow then. I want to keep going. But then I say, well, why do you do that? I say, because then I have something to look forward to the next day when I come back to the project. I can pick up at an exciting part of the story. So I thought, well, that's very interesting.
It is interesting. And I have tried that. The problem was where I thought, where I left it, this is the action that I foresaw it taking. But then when I went back to it the next day, I took it in a different direction. And it was like, well, and then you pause afterwards. And it's like, okay, did I go in the right direction? So for me, I just, if I'm in the flow, I'm getting it on the page, because I don't want to lose that channel. because if I lose that channel, that connection, then odds are it's not coming back. I won't connect back with it. So I keep going. But again, for that person who can stop there, have at it, please do that. Do whatever it takes to make it work for you and what feels good to you.
Right. Find what works. That's the important thing. Find what works for you. Find your own form of discipline and, stick with that. And if that means you're writing every other day, fine. If you're writing in spurts, fine. If you get up every morning or do it in the afternoon, that's great too. But, what works for you? Because everybody comes at it with different life circumstances.
Yeah.
They have full-time jobs or part-time jobs. They're taking care of children, or they're not taking care of children. They're taking care of parents, or they got all the time in the world, don't know how to organize themselves. So find what works for you, and don't beat yourself up about what you're doing. But find a good space too that you like to write in, and sometimes mix it up if that works for you.
Yeah.
Go to a coffee shop or a co-working space or something, or stay late at your office if it feels good to you to do it that way, and you can have some quiet time. But I think it really is. I mean, it is a solitude endeavor to write, put the words on the page, but so you need to find the space and the time that works for you.
Agreed. All righty. Well, we have been talking for a long time, and I've lost track of time, actually, which is a good thing. I mean, truly, when I'm not sitting there going, oh, can I at least push this conversation 30 minutes? No, actually, I think I've had that once. And it was interesting because, you mentioned earlier about the podcast guest who's the yes no response, and I know that that's out of fear of saying the wrong thing or feeling like they're going to say something that makes them look unprofessional or not how they want to present themselves. And with some, there's this hurdle that as soon as they feel comfortable, I know that I'm not, doing that interrogation, because I try to tell everybody that this is a conversation between two writers, two people who love the act of writing and so forth. They still don't know me, so they're withdrawn, they're held back. But as soon as they get comfortable with me, it's like, then time goes away.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I think sometimes when people give those short answers, there's nervousness there. They may not have ever appeared on the podcast, or as you say, they don't know that we have the ability to edit out the spaces or the gaffes or whatever. And so I had that happen one time, and we were into it for a couple minutes, and I said, hold on, I just need to stop the recording a second. And I stopped the recording, and I said, let's go at this a little different. I'm going to ask you a few questions about, your past and kind of what you do. And I asked some questions, and I said, just loosen up. We're going to have fun. I've got editing software. And I started with some very easy questions, about, where they grew up and what they like to do and that kind of thing. And then they just started talking. Once they started talking, the dam was broken, and they were very comfortable, and they were able to answer all these questions about their book and their writing life and that kind of thing. So, it is awkward. So I just try to tell people, don't worry about it. We'll fix it. That's why we have editing software.
And that's why I have no problems telling people I edit out, the cough or the dog barking in the background or, the sneeze. I had one gentleman who, bless his soul, he had a cold. Or he was just getting over a cold. So there were periods where he couldn't mute himself fast enough and start coughing. And I'm like, don't worry about it. He's like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, no, don't. I edit out my ands, ums, and, you have no idea how many knows that I cut out because I'm a knower.
That's great.
So yes, I don't ever want anybody to feel like if they say too many ums, I take a few of those out because I don't want anybody to go, oh, that was so horrible. I don't want anybody to hear that. I want them to be like, hey, I was on this podcast. Listen to how great I sound. It's not how I sounded in the podcast because I know I said too many times. And, I want them to feel good about it, because if they feel good about it, then they're going to share it.
Yeah, and you've got a very relaxed way about you, which is great for a podcast host. I love the fact that you like to laugh. I love the fact that you like to, talk and poke fun at yourself too. And that there's a certain humanizing element to that for the guest, and it allows them to get comfortable too, and maybe poke fun at themselves as well. Like the recovering trial lawyer.
Yeah. And when I first read that, the first time I read it, I'm like, recovering, what is he recovering from? And then of course the imagination goes in 20 different directions, and it's
Exactly.
like, is this an addiction?
Exactly. I talk about it in the book. I said, there's a thing about lawyers. It's we don't know when to get out of the profession. The older we get and the more awards we get, we think we know more than we do. And I use this little line in the latest novel about if they get beyond 65 and they're still practicing law, it's kind of like, the Hotel California song, they can check out, but they can never leave.
Yes.
So, because we don't know what to do with ourselves except we've done all our lives. So I'm recovering a little bit from that mentality. And as part of that recovery, I'm trying to experience, creative endeavors that I might be a little hesitant to try, but I want to give it a shot and see what happens.
That's awesome. So where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, they can find me at landiswade.com, LANDISWADE.com. Also at charlottereaderspodcast.com, and just Google Landis Wade and you'll find probably a bunch of podcast episodes and some information about my books.
That's wonderful. That is the intent when we Google ourselves or
Right.
Google someone. We hope to find them.
Yeah.
And preferably not weird images.
Well,
so.
yeah, you might find old court cases too that went up to different places too. But hopefully they'll be further down the list now than the podcasting and the writing. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. I am so grateful for your time. This has truly been, a great experience, a great conversation. It's always good. I feel really good at the end of the podcast if I've clicked away from, because when I before the podcast, I write out a few questions in case the guest that's not comfortable and what do I say? I've got a few questions that I can ask them. And truly the only question that I've asked you that was on my list was that very first one where I mentioned, so I'd like to go down the rabbit hole of what is a recovery trial lawyer, but I want to talk about podcasting. And, I flimsily went off the script that I had written for that question. After 5 minutes, I clicked away from those questions, and these are the best kinds of conversations when it just flows. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
It.
No, it's the mark of a good interviewer when you start with a question and then you don't have to look back at your outline again. You made it very conversational. It was very comfortable to be here. And as I said earlier, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this educational and entertaining conversation with recovering lawyer and author Landis Wade. To learn more about Landis's books and his podcast, you will find links to access his websites at pentopaperpress.com/podcast, and of course select the show notes page for this episode. When you rate and follow the Pen to Paper Press podcast on your favorite app, and of course leave a comment on the show notes page, you help to increase the rankings of this podcast. Your support is so greatly appreciated. I can't thank you enough. If you prefer to receive future episodes in your inbox, subscribe to the Pen to Paper Press newsletter and follow the Pen to Paper Press podcast on social media. That way you'll get the newest episode. Take care. And until next time, keep your pen to paper and write. Stay curious and know that your words have power and your story matters. Bye for now.